Hamish Barlow was not a man who often wondered about the meaning of life. His work in a large corporation, associated with constant flights and endless business trips, has long superseded any opportunity for deep philosophical reflection. However, the moment his plane began to fall apart in the air, Hamish's mind instantly caught on to one simple thought. What the hell am I even doing here? His flight was just another routine. Not that he liked flying, but it was part of his daily life. Hamish couldn't remember exactly where he was going this time. Some kind of regular presentation in Tokyo or a meeting in Singapore, it didn't matter. Everything seemed normal until the very second when everything abruptly went wrong. An unpleasant sensation of vibration passed through the fuselage of the aircraft, as if the steel shell itself began to tremble with horror. At first, Hamish thought it was just turbulence. But when the oxygen masks began to fall out of the ceilings, an understanding flashed in his head. This is serious.
Damn.
Hamish's heart was pounding so fast that his breathing was out of control. The screams of the passengers broke the silence, turning the cabin into a chaotic mess of sounds. A sharp jerk to the side, and the plane went into a steep dive, as if some giant invisible fist had hit it right on the nose. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, his body was thrown into the air, the seat belt plunged into his chest, as if intending to tear him in half. Panic gripped everyone except one person, the pilot, who announced through a loudspeaker in a monotone voice.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are crashing. I hope you had enough time to fasten your seatbelts.
The pilot's voice sounded like a crash was a daily routine. Hamish could only curse under his breath, mentally cursing whoever had chosen this flight. The plane began to descend sharply. The air whistled outside the windows, and at the moment when the hull began to break apart, Hamish saw the sky, a blue, bright, vast sky that seemed hostile and indifferent to their destinies. When the plane finally broke apart, Hamish flew out of his seat, feeling his body sink into the void. Time has slowed down. He saw how chairs, luggage, and people were mixed up in a chaotic orbit, spinning around him in zero gravity. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Hamish, it seemed like an eternity. All these years of flying, all these unnecessary meetings, and here it is, the end. It's all useless. However, at the moment when his consciousness was about to sink into absolute emptiness, pain set in. A strong blow to the whole body, and then darkness. When Hamish woke up, his first sensation was salt. He could feel it on his lips, on his skin, even in his eyes. He was lying on the sand and the ocean waves were gently licking his feet, as if teasing him with their coolness. His head ached, every muscle burned, but most importantly, he was alive. He slowly sat up, blinking and looking at the endless ocean in front of him. The remains of the plane, torn apart and scattered along the shore, were still smoking on the horizon. He realized that he was on an island somewhere. Immediately, the thought of being the only survivor made his heart ache. There was not a soul around, not a single sign of civilization, just a vast emptiness, an uninhabited island.
Damn,
he muttered, cursing his luck. He spent several hours in a daze, searching through the remains of the plane in search of something useful. A few pieces of debris, a life jacket, a broken walkie-talkie, all this was useless cargo. The realization of his loneliness was slowly coming, like a tide that could not be stopped. In the evening, Hamish settled down by an improvised campfire made from improvised tools. Darkness enveloped the island, and the only source of light was the stars that hung in the dark sky. He looked at them, feeling a dull despair grow in him. The silence of the night was frightening, but at some point it was interrupted by an unusual sound. A soft, almost invisible rustle passed through the sand, and Hamish turned sharply. At first he thought it was just the wind, or maybe some kind of animal, but when the lights of this campfire illuminated the figure on the shore, he caught his breath. There was something in front of him that he had never seen before. A tall, graceful figure shrouded in the light of the moon and stars stood a few meters away from him. This creature was clearly not human. His skin, or what Hamish might have mistaken for skin, shimmered with strange shades of green and blue, as if it were some kind of living matter. The creature's eyes shone with a cold, lifeless light, and Hamish realized that something unearthly was in front of him. The creature, a woman, if that was what it could be called, came slowly closer, her footsteps leaving almost no footprints in the sand. She didn't say a word, just watched him as if studying him. And at that moment, Hamish felt a strange feeling, a mixture of horror and attraction.
What the hell?
He gasped, trying to figure out what was going on. But instead of answers, he heard only a small voice sounding in his head. The voice was soft but alien, devoid of the usual human intonation. Hamish started and looked around as if someone was standing behind him, but there was no one nearby. At that moment, he realized that the voice was not coming from somewhere, but from his mind. The creature in front of him did not speak in words. It communicated telepathically. He took a few steps back, feeling panic creep over him again. But something about this creature made him not run. The creature stopped, looking at him with its glowing eyes.
Suggest. Who are you?
His voice was shaking when he finally managed to speak.
I'm Solana,
Came the answer in his head.
and I'm stuck here just like you.
Only one word echoed in his mind as he continued to stand and stare at her in silence. The night was slowly giving way to the first light of dawn as Hamish sat staring at the horizon. He wasn't sleeping. What kind of dream is there when you've just come face to face with a creature that shouldn't exist? An alien. The word still sounded absurd in his head, like a fairy tale from his childhood, but now it was reality. Solana, he couldn't forget that moment when her strange, unhuman voice first sounded in his mind. Telepathy, or something even more incomprehensible. Hamish's mind was racing with questions, but he couldn't afford to panic. Well, it's obvious that they're both trapped on this island, and certainly neither of them will be able to get out anytime soon. When Solana appeared for the first time, Hamish couldn't take his eyes off her. They were so strange, so alien, luminous pupils that seemed to see right through him. It was as if she was studying him on a level inaccessible to ordinary human perception. And it was disconcerting. Her whole figure, her movements, and even her very voice, everything about her was completely alien. But at the same time, something inside him clung to her, as if this terrible, catastrophic world didn't matter as long as she was a...
I'm not the enemy.
Hamish recalled her saying,
Enemies don't say that, do they?
but friends do not appear in the middle of the night on deserted beaches and do not communicate through thoughts. Hamish tried to push the memory away, got up, stretched, and went to the place where he had seen Solana standing last night. Her ship, a strange star-shaped fragment, crashed into the shore and looked hopelessly damaged. He felt her presence before he saw her. My stomach clenched with a strange feeling, a mixture of anxiety and some inexplicable excitement, as if I was facing something unknown, which I did not expect, but longed to meet. She was standing on the edge of the shore, staring out at the ocean, her back to him. The waves gently touched her long legs, which seemed to be part of this world, and at the same time something extraterrestrial. Her hair, long and as if made of luminous matter, was moving in the wind. She didn't move, but Hamish knew she could feel him coming.
You.
He began, but her voice filled his mind again before he could continue.
You're trying to talk again.
She said without turning around.
That's not bad. I understand that using sounds is important to you, but I have a different way of communicating.
Hamish froze. Why did she manage to get into his mind so easily? He could feel her thoughts flowing smoothly through his mind, like water through his fingers. It was like an invasion, but not painful, but on the contrary, soft, almost comfortable. And yet it was frightening.
If you're here the same way I am,
He continued, trying to speak clearly despite his pounding heart.
we need to do something. Working together, isn't it?
She turned to face him, her eyes fixed on him, and again that strange feeling as if her gaze penetrated to the very depths of his being, revealing all his fears, doubts, and feelings.
You're right, Hamish.
She said, and the name sounded in his head as if it had never belonged to him, but she used it with such confidence.
We are stuck here, and cooperation is the only way to survive.
Hamish nodded, although the movement seemed unnecessary to him. She could clearly feel his every thought and emotion. It annoyed him, but at the same time, her presence was beginning to evoke something else in him, something he couldn't explain in words.
All right.
He said, sighing heavily.
But if you're in my mind, how do I talk to you? It's kind of like that Unnatural.
Solana tilted her head slightly. Her luminous eyes softened.
I can feel your thoughts if you want me to hear them, but I also understand your language. We can talk like this if it makes you feel better, but you'll have to get used to me. I'm not like anyone you know.
That was an understatement. Not only did she not look like people, she seemed to him to be an entity from another world, from another dimension, and this fact made him feel uncomfortable. But day after day, despite the tension, a strange rhythm of communication began to establish between them. Hamish had a lot of questions. Who was she before she came here? How did she survive? Why did her ship crash? But Solana rarely answered them, limiting herself to only fragmentary explanations. She was talking about her own world, far away and beyond comprehension, and Hamish felt a chasm growing between them. However, every day this gap seemed to be getting smaller. He began to notice little things, how her movements became less constrained in his presence, how she sometimes held her gaze on him a little longer than necessary. At first, it might have seemed like simple curiosity, but soon he began to realize that it was more than that. One day, when they were exploring the far side of the island together, Hamish noticed how their hands involuntarily touched each other. It was a fleeting touch, but at that moment his heart stopped. He looked up at Solana and saw that she had noticed it too.
I'm sorry,
Muttered, pulling his hand away.
No need to apologize.
She replied softly, looking at him with her strange, deeply understanding eyes.
You feel fear, but I won't hurt you. I'm here just like you. One.
The word
Alone.
echoed in his soul. She's right, they're both stuck here, both abandoned, both alone. Deep down, he knew that she was just as lost as he was. As the weeks passed, their communication became less strained. Hamish began to notice details he hadn't noticed before. Subtle changes in her face, slight undertones in her voice that were barely discernible to the human ear. He understood her mood even when she wasn't talking. It was a strange but delightful feeling, as if they had begun to synchronize with each other on a level inaccessible to ordinary communication. He was a human, and she was a creature from a distant world, and yet was starting to seem less important. He noticed that he missed her presence when she went far ashore to try to repair her ship. Sometimes it seemed to him that her absence made this island even more empty. But one day everything changed. When he saw her in the sunset light standing on the edge of the cliff, her figure seemed to dissolve into the scarlet light of the setting sun. He came closer and felt his breathing quicken. At that moment, everything inside him, fear, embarrassment, distrust, dissolved, leaving only one feeling that he could not ignore: attraction. And although he hadn't fully realized it yet, a bond had already begun to develop between them that couldn't be explained in words. Day after day, Hamish and Solana explored the island, exploring its nooks and hidden secrets. Despite its outward silence and apparent serenity, the island harbored many dangers that they did not even know about. However, so far, nothing directly threatened their safety, except for the vague feeling of anxiety that Hamish felt every morning. He couldn't completely trust the tranquility of this place. The ocean remained as lifeless and empty as on the first day, and during the day the island warmed up so much that the air trembled over the hot sand, making everything around seem even more unreal. Solana, however, seemed calm. She continued her attempts to rebuild her ship, although every day her confidence that they would be able to leave the island was fading. Hamish saw her long, graceful fingers touching the thin panels of the ship, but he no longer believed that these strange alien technologies would be able to work again. Her ship, half hidden by the sand, looked more like a monument to failure than a means of escape. But Solana didn't give up. She spent hours sitting by the ship and lost in her thoughts, which Hamish assumed were more complex and layered than anything he could imagine. One day, sitting by the campfire, they were silent again. This silence has become familiar to them. Words were unnecessary now. There was such a deep connection between them that sometimes Hamish could feel her presence even hundreds of meters away. And yet, this feeling did not soften their strange, tense distance. She remained a mystery to him, a mystery that he longed to solve, but was afraid to touch too close. That evening, everything changed. They went to the western part of the island, to an area that has not yet been explored. Solana insisted that she needed more information about the flora and fauna as well as any possible resources that could help repair her ship. Hamish, despite his doubts, could not refuse. He knew he had to go with her. Deep down, he liked being around her, even if he didn't fully understand her intention. The western part of the island was covered with dense jungle, overflowing with vines and strange, unfamiliar plants. The island seemed to be torn into two parts, one serene and sandy, the other full of life and danger. Hamish felt a growing sense of unease with every step they took deeper into the forest. The sun was slowly setting when they finally reached an inconspicuous lake hidden in the shade of huge trees.
It's safer here than it looks.
Solana said, sensing his concern. Her voice rang through his mind again. It wasn't as strange as it had been in the beginning, but it was still unusual.
You think so?
Yeah, Hamish muttered, looking around. There was something he didn't like about it. The air was too thick, too humid, and the excitement was growing by the minute. They came closer to the water, and Solana, kneeling down, began to study some strange stones at the edge of the lake. Hamish stayed where he was, scanning the trees and undergrowth as if expecting something to pop out from behind them. But nothing happened. Suddenly, the sky darkened. Quickly, as if someone had turned off the light. In a matter of seconds, thick clouds swirled overhead, and the air, which was hot and humid, became strangely cool. Hamish clenched his teeth as he stared at the rapidly approaching storm.
We have to go back.
He raised his hand, pointing in the direction they came from.
Solana, we need to get out of here.
But she didn't move. Sitting on her knees by the water, she was looking at the lake. Her face was focused, as if she saw something important, something that could give answers to her endless questions.
There's something here. I have to understand this.
There is no time. Hamish's voice became strained, and he moved closer to her, grabbing her shoulder. It was the first time he had touched her so directly. Her skin was cold but warm at the same time, as if something other than blood was flowing under the surface of her body. He felt a sharp electric jolt, as if something inside her responded to his touch. Solana slowly looked up at him. At that moment, something happened that Hamish could not have expected. Their thoughts collided, not just words, but a whole stream of images, emotions, and memories. He caught a glimpse of her past, the distant stars, her planet, her family, everything she had lost when she was here. It was overwhelming, too much for his human mind. He recoiled, breathing heavily. Solana looked at him as if she understood what had happened. Their bond was getting deeper and deeper, and it scared him. But what scared him the most was that he liked it. He wanted to know more. I wanted to know everything. But at that moment, the island decided to strike at them. The storm broke out with sudden fury. A strong wind hit them in the face, kicking up sand and mud. The forest around them groaned like a living thing, and Hamish felt a surge of fear. Tree branches began to break and fall to the ground.
No. Let's go.
Him shouted over the roar of the wind. Solana didn't seem to feel panicked. She stood up and looked up at the sky as if she expected something more, and this more has come. The ground shook under their feet as if nature itself had decided that it was time for them to get out of here. Hamish felt something strange happening around them. The air was filled with a vibration that reverberated through his bones. He couldn't figure out if it was just fear or some kind of anomaly. But when he saw how the water in the lake began to rise, as if an invisible force was pulling it up, all doubts disappeared.
Ma, what the hell is this?
His voice was trembling, and he looked back at Solana, who, despite everything that was happening, remained calm. She came closer to him, her eyes twinkling in the semi-darkness.
The island is alive.
She replied as if that was the most natural explanation.
What?
Mace, this is not just a place.
She spoke quickly but confidently.
There's a power here that I can't explain. And she woke up.
Before Hamish could reply, the ground beneath them began to shake again, and the trees began to fall one by one. He pulled on Solana's arm, forcing her to run with him towards their hideout. The storm raged around them, but worst of all was the feeling that the island itself was against them. They made their way through the forest, barely managing to avoid falling branches and rocks when they finally reached the familiar shore. But there was another trouble waiting for them. Their camp was almost destroyed. The bonfire had long since gone out, and most of their supplies were scattered on the beach. When they were relatively safe, Hamish looked at Solana, barely catching his breath. She looked the same as before, But now there was something new in her eyes, some deep, strange emotion that he couldn't describe. All he knew was that they were no longer just two creatures stranded on an island. Their bond was getting deeper than he could have imagined. And despite all the dangers, he felt that he could no longer reject this connection. They needed each other to survive. The island tried to separate them, but instead only brought them closer. And that was just the beginning. Hamish lay on the hot sand, watching the last rays of the sun lazily touch the horizon. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if the whole world around him had stopped, giving him time to enjoy this moment of calm after a stormy day. His heart, which was still pounding alarmingly in his chest, finally began to calm down. The storm subsided, leaving behind only a slight hissing of the wind and the constant rolling of the waves on the shore. The air was saturated with salt and moisture, but something had changed inside Hamish. He felt a strange warmth that had nothing to do with the island or the sun. This warmth came from within, spreading through his body slowly, like a fire that was just starting to flare up. The excitement, which had previously been a continuous stream of thoughts and emotions, now gave way to something new, something deep, something that was part of his being but remained hidden for a long time. Everything that had happened on this island, from the wreck to this storm, seemed less important now, less scary. Solana was there, and her presence no longer seemed alien. Rather, it has become something necessary. She was somewhere nearby. Hamish knew that, although he couldn't see her. He felt her as one feels the warm breeze or the whisper of the ocean. Every time she was around, he felt a strange tingling in his chest, a slight tension, as if his body was tuning into another frequency, a frequency that belonged to her. Solana was an alien. It couldn't be forgotten, but every day it seemed less important. In her presence, all the usual logic disappeared, all the boundaries that previously seemed unshakable. She was more than just a creature from another world. Something Hamish couldn't understand was pulling him closer to her every moment, as if there was more to their meeting than just an accident. He closed his eyes, trying to focus on his feelings. Flashes of memories came flooding back to him. Their first touch by the lake, the strange feeling when their thoughts intertwined for a moment, revealing fragments of the past, emotions and desires to each other. It had been a shock at the time, but now that he remembered that moment, a feeling not of fear rose inside him, but of something completely different. He longed for it again, as if this touch had revealed something forgotten and long lost in him. The silence was broken by a subtle movement. Hamish opened his eyes and saw her. Solana stood at the water's edge, her long, graceful legs partially submerged in the ocean, and her silvery hair gently fluttered in the wind. She was looking at the horizon, as if she was looking for something there beyond the boundaries of human perception. Her figure seemed unreal, as if she was part of this island, part of these waves, this wind. She moved with extraordinary grace, and every line of her, every little thing in her appearance said that she belonged to another world. But at the same time, there was something so natural about her presence that Hamish could no longer see her as just an outsider. She turned her head, and their eyes met. For a moment, time stood still. There were no words or sounds between them, just a silent understanding that grew with each passing moment. Hamish couldn't look away, as if something was holding him back, forcing him to look into her eyes, glowing with a soft, unearthly light. There was something inexplicable in her gaze, something that pierced through him, leaving only a strange, deep feeling. Slowly stood up, feeling the strange energy that emanated from her ignite inside him. It was something indescribable, something that was hard to put into words, but it wasn't important. Their bodies, their presence, everything around them seemed to start synchronizing on some deep level. The air between them trembled, as if every step they took brought them closer to something unimaginable. Hamish came closer, feeling the atmosphere begin to change around him. It was a feeling as if the air was thickening, becoming heavy, but at the same time filled with some kind of internal vibration. They were standing at arm's length, but that distance no longer mattered. He felt her presence so strongly, as if she were inside him. Her breathing, light and imperceptible, seemed to synchronize with his own. He couldn't remember exactly when he took a step forward. The movement was almost instinctive, as if his body knew what to do even though his mind had not yet made a decision. Their fingers slowly touched, and at that moment, something extraordinary happened. It was more than just a touch. Solana was a creature of a different nature, and her energy seemed to flow through him, immersing him in an incredible feeling of warmth and light. He felt his body begin to respond to this contact, as if a portal had opened inside him into something more than he could imagine. It was like pure energy, a flow that connected them on all levels, physical, emotional, and spiritual. When their hands closed, he felt something strange. It was more than just the warmth from her body. It was the energy that flowed from her to him, filling every cell of his being. She was like a living current, smoothly penetrating into his mind and body, blurring the boundaries between them. At that moment, Hamish realized that there had never been any real boundaries between them. They were connected from the very beginning, from the moment when their destinies crossed on this island. His mind began to lose touch with reality. Everything that had happened up to that moment, the storm, the fear, the loneliness, was nothing compared to what was happening now. He no longer felt like an outsider on this island any more than he felt like an outsider next to her. Their bodies began to move in time to this invisible rhythm, as if they had always known this dance. Every breath, every movement was synchronized, as if they were part of one whole. Solana hugged him, and the touch was so powerful that Hamish could barely stand on his feet. Her skin was smooth, cool, but there was a flame burning inside him. Her energy field was merging with his own, creating something new, something so powerful that his mind couldn't comprehend it. At that moment, they ceased to be separate beings. They merged together like waves merging with the ocean, becoming a part of it. Its movement, its rhythm. The light inside her that Hamish had seen all this time was now his light. He felt his body begin to emit the same glow as his arms and legs began to tremble from the energy that flowed through them. It wasn't just a physical attraction. It was something much deeper, something that united them on a level he could never have dreamed of. Hamish felt his mind become a part of hers. He was no longer a lonely man stranded on a desert island. He became a part of something bigger, a part of the universe, a part of it. He could feel her thoughts, her emotions, her past, which she was trying to hide. He saw her fears, her desires, her hopes. And in all this, he found a reflection of his own feelings. Night slowly descended on the island, and their figures disappeared into the shadows. The light inside them was still on, but it was invisible to the outside world. It was the light of their connection, their unity, which could no longer be broken. This moment changed everything. Hamish could no longer think the way he used to. He was connected to Solana on a level that defied explanation, and this feeling filled him completely. He was no longer the man who was wrecked on this island. He was someone else now, someone new. Their passion was not earthly, not human. She was much more than that. She was the force that connected their souls, their bodies, their universe. The sun was slowly rising above the horizon, illuminating the island with a soft golden light. The sand glistened as if it were covered with a thin film of liquid gold. There was almost no wind, only light breezes gently caressing the foliage of the palm trees and touching the leather wings of the waves rolling near the shore. It seemed that the whole of nature had fallen into a kind of sleepy, serene state, as if holding its breath in anticipation of something important. Hamish stood by the water, his bare feet barely touching the cold waves, and he looked out at the ocean, feeling his inner world reflected in this tranquility. But something inside him was bothering. It was an anxiety, rather a strange, weary expectation, as if something incredible was about to happen on the threshold of his life. He couldn't explain it logically, but he felt with every cell of his body that something was changing. The island that once seemed strange, wild, and frightening to him has now become a part of himself. He knew every curve of the sand dunes, every shrub, and every tree, as if this piece of land had become an extension of his own soul. Everything breathed the same life, and he was a part of it. But today it was different. There was something unusual in the air today, something elusive, but powerful, like a thunderstorm that hides behind the horizon, ready to burst at any moment. Solana hasn't been around for several days. She went deeper into the island to where the rocky hills turned into dense forests, and Hamish felt that this was due to the change he felt in himself. Their bond has become more than just a physical attraction or even a spiritual unit. It was something deeper, something that transcended all the laws of nature as he knew them. The sun was still rising when Hamish felt a jolt in his chest, as if an unknown force had quietly called him. He knew where to go. His feet carried him through dense vegetation, along narrow paths, past familiar trees and boulders, until he reached the very place where, according to his inner feelings, Solana was. She was lying on her back in the shade of the trees. Her breathing was slow but deep, and the air around her was saturated with a strange energy. Her skin, usually glowing with a soft silvery light, now radiated a warmer, almost golden glow, as if she was absorbing the sun's rays and converting them into her own power. Her body, slender and graceful, lay still, but Hamish could feel the tension radiating from her. It was the tension of nature as she prepares for the most important event, the birth of a new life. He slowly moved closer, watching as her breathing became more ragged and rapid. Her eyes were closed, but her face remained calm. At that moment, Hamish realized what was happening. He didn't know how it was possible, but he knew for sure. A new life was being born inside Solana, their life, their child. He sat down next to her. His fingers gently touched her hand, and at that moment, everything became clear. It was more than just a biological process. He felt the island respond to this miracle. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, as if nature itself welcomed this moment. The trees softly rustled their leaves, creating a soft melody, and the wind, which barely touched their faces, seemed to calm them both. Stein has lost its meaning. The moments dragged on endlessly and then compressed into one vivid feeling. He watched as her body changed smoothly. With each breath, it began to glow brighter, as if an unimaginable explosion of energy was taking place inside her, which was necessary for birth. She was more than just a woman or an alien. She was the embodiment of the power of nature, creative and destructive at the same time. And Hamish, as a man who had existed all his life in a world governed by the laws of physics and logic, suddenly found himself witnessing something truly divine. Solana's body began to slowly emit light, which became brighter and brighter. Hamish instinctively covered his eyes with his hand, but he still felt the force. She permeated him, making every cell of his body tremble. The feeling was both frightening and enchanting. It was a force that he couldn't control, but that had become a part of himself. At some point, the light suddenly went out, and there was absolute silence. Even the wind stopped, as if all living things were frozen in anticipation. Hamish slowly opened his eyes, his heart beating faster than ever. He saw Solana lying in front of him, her face calm, almost peaceful. And next to her on the ground lay a small, almost transparent bundle. Hamish froze in disbelief. Child, their child. His body looked like that of a baby, but at the same time, it emitted a faint light, as if this small organism had absorbed the energy of its parents. Hamish was breathing hard. It was something incredible. He slowly reached out his hand, gently touching the little creature. His skin was as soft as silk, and it radiated warmth like sunlight. The world around them began to breathe again. A light wind stirred the leaves of the trees again, and the singing of birds returned to the forest. The island seemed to accept this new creature as part of itself. Hamish felt his heart filled with a feeling he had never experienced before. It was love, but not simple, but some kind of primal, deep, without boundaries. It was love for Solana, for their child, for this place that had become a part of their lives. He carefully picked up the child in his arms, his fingers trembling with excitement. The small eyes opened, and Hamish saw in them a reflection of the light that had once emanated from Solana. It was a creature born not only of flesh, but also of energy, of the light they shared. It was their common world, their life, their future. Solana slowly stood up, her breathing recovered, and she smiled faintly as she looked at their child. Their eyes met, and Hamish realized that words were unnecessary. Everything that needed to be said had already been said through their bond, through the love that now bound the three of them forever. They were no longer just two creatures stranded on an island. They became a family, and although this island was still a mystery to them, it no longer seemed hostile or alien. Now this place was home, because it was here that their new life was born. Silence enveloped the forest again, but there was something incredible in this silence. It was a silence filled with life, love, and light. And in the midst of this silence, Hamish realized that their future would now forever be linked to this place and the amazing forces that surrounded them. Their life was just beginning. The sun was breaking through the dense foliage, golden rays dancing on the surface of the leaves like ever-changing patterns. This morning light seemed alive, filling the island with warmth and light. Everything seemed to breathe in unison with nature. The island that once seemed harsh and hostile has now become their home. The place where life was born, where their new family found a way to the future. Hamish stood at the edge of a clearing where tall, seemingly endless trees guarded their small world. Their house was now right in the middle of nature, and although it wasn't a real house in the usual sense, Hamish felt as if this place had become his refuge. His refuge, his own world. He no longer needed concrete and steel urban bustle and civilization. Here, on this island, he found something more important, the peace of mind that he had always lacked. He looked around. Solana was sitting nearby, her long, luminous hair falling over her shoulders, softly shimmering in the rays of the sun. In her arms was their child, a small creature whose life was just beginning, but whose presence had already changed everything around. He was born in a world where the laws of nature are intertwined with something magical, and this made his existence seem incredible, almost fabulous. Hamish watched as Solana held the baby carefully as she gently touched his little fingers. The child looked at the world with open eyes. His gaze was full of surprise and novelty. His every gesture, every breath was filled with life, and this life was part of the miracle that happened on this island. Their child was not just their flesh and blood, he was a symbol of their union, their common strength, their love. It has been several months since the baby was born, and these months have become something for Hamish that he will never forget. He learned to be a father in a world where there were no familiar landmarks, where there were no instructions or advice, where his instincts and natural rhythms were the only teachers. But it seemed right. Everything that was happening around them was leading them to something bigger than themselves. Hamish looked up at the sky. The blue, almost cloudless skies seemed to stretch into infinity, and somewhere far away, beyond this world, there were other worlds, other civilizations. He knew that he had once been a part of another reality, another life, but now it all seemed unimportant. Here and now was the most important thing. Everything was blooming around. Nature was rampaging, as if welcoming their new beginning. Birds fluttered among the trees, calling to each other, creating melodies that intertwined with the whisper of leaves and the breeze. The green hills covered with wild vegetation reminded Hamish of how full of life this island is, how connected everything is here. His every step echoed in every corner of the place. He felt like he had become part of this ecosystem, part of something ancient that had lived on the island for many years before their arrival. Time passed differently here. The days slowly turned into nights, and the nights turned back into days, and they gradually stopped counting the days. Life in a new rhythm has become natural. Instead of clocks and calendars, their life cycles began to be determined by sunrises and sunsets, tides and ebbs. Time didn't mean anything anymore. It was a release from the old restrictions, and Hamish felt this freedom filling him from the inside. He often noticed how Solana merged with nature, her movements as smooth as leaves swayed by the wind. Sometimes she stood looking at the horizon, her eyes glowing as if she could see things that were inaccessible to him. But he no longer felt alienated from it. Their bond had become so deep that he didn't need to know what she was thinking or feeling. He just felt her near, her presence, as one feels the warmth of the sun on one's skin. The baby was developing rapidly, like everything on this strange island. His body was supple, and his eyes were wise beyond their age. Sometimes Hamish looked at him and saw something unearthly in his gaze, something he could never have imagined in a child. It wasn't frightening, rather, it was mesmerizing. He was a part of Solana, a part of her world, and in this child lived their common light, their love, their future. Every day brought something new. Sometimes it was a minor detail, a tiny movement or gesture of the baby. Sometimes it was something more, like the time when their child first got to his feet and took his first steps on the ground. This moment filled Hamish with pride and joy, like no other achievement in his previous life. He saw how the child began to understand the world around him, how his little fingers reached out to the leaves, to the stones, to the water. The island was his first home, and everything around him was a new discovery. He knew neither fear nor doubt, only pure curiosity and a desire for life. and it was a miracle for Hamish to see their child become a part of this world, a part of nature. Over time, Hamish began to notice how their child began to interact with the island in a different way than he did. He was connected to this place on a level Hamish couldn't fully understand. Sometimes when the child touched the ground or water, it seemed that the island responded to him. The leaves began to rustle louder. The water in the lagoon shimmered with brighter shades. It wasn't just a coincidence. Hamish felt that their child had some special connection to this place. It was an island that accepted them for who they were. He was no longer alien or hostile to them. He became part of their family. And this feeling of oneness with nature, with the earth, with the sky, with the water was something Hamish had never experienced before. They were more than just a family. They became part of something much bigger than their own lives. Sometimes at night, Hamish would wake up listening to the wind blowing softly through the trees and see Solana sitting next to him, watching their child sleeping peacefully next to them. She was calm, her face was peaceful, and in her eyes he saw the same love that he felt himself. At such moments he understood that they had found their place in this world. Not in the world they came from, but in this new, alien but so native, he felt the future. It was like a bright path leading deep into the island where new discoveries, new challenges, but also a new life await them. It was a hopeful future, and Hamish knew they could handle anything because they were a family now. Not just a man and an alien stranded on a desert island, but people who have found a home in a new world, created a new life, and accepted it with all its oddities. The sky was gradually starting to darken, and the first stars were already looming on the horizon. Hamish looked up and smiled. He no longer felt lost. Everything they needed was here nearby. Solana, their child, their home. That was all that mattered. And no matter what lay ahead, he was sure that they would walk this path together, hand in hand, as a family.